Panama, but I also want to have kind of stimulate your thinking about birds in general, including the birds that we have in Washington and why we have what we have where we are. But first, I want you to imagine that right now it's April 6th and you just flew into Panama. You just went up into the mountains and you immediately had to go out for a walk, and you're up there in the mountains now, and it's cloudy and it's 6 o'clock. And remember, this is the tropics, so the sun is starting to set. You've got a mile and a half back to the lodge, and you know you need to get back because there's pumas up here, there's jaguars, there's poisonous vine snakes, but you can't move. The birds have caught you. The birds are singing. The frogs are singing. There's insects just chirping around. And as you can see, the fog is drifting in and coming up here. You're in the tropics, and it is just absolutely magnificent. And then you start to hear this absolutely beautiful song. It's like a quartet, a woodwind quartet going. It's a black-faced solitaire, a close relative to our Townsend solitaire, and it's singing away. Listen to its song. Well, there, that whistle song there. Each of those is a little bit different. It just has a lot of variation. Now, we have a single vocal cords, but birds like this solitaire have two syrinxes, and this bird is actually using both syrinxes at the same time. So it's harmonizing with itself. Just listen to that. It's just magnificent. How can you possibly go back for dinner when you get to hear that? Just really nice. It's just kind of absorbed into that. Now, if you listen, there, it's going now. You hear that whistle? That's the gray-breasted wood wren. Just an incredibly complex song. Now, it's actually a duet. The male and the female are calling at the same time. They live down in the understory where it's dense. They can't see us, each other, so they often stay in contact by singing simultaneously. Each of those notes, the alternating notes, is given by the other member of the sex. Now, the wrens are a family from the New World, and there's only one species that's gone over into the Eastern Hemisphere, over into Europe and Asia. Now, you heard that loud whistle in the background here? It's going to come again, I think, in a second. There, you hear that? Almost knocks you right out of your seat there. That's a three-wattled bellbird. That's a Katinga. It's in a group called Suboscines, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And I always think its call is about 20 times louder than it should be. It's actually annoying. Just hear how loud that is. Now you listen there in the background too. You're starting to hear something that sounds familiar, right? That's a Swainson's thrush. There, see it practicing? They're actually moving through Panama at this time of the year in April, headed north. They're going to come up here to the Pacific Northwest to breed, or up into Canada to breed. Just incredible. You've got a lot of kind of songs going on out there. Isn't that a beautiful song? Hear that chip? That's also from the Swainson's thrush chip. There's its song. Now we're looking down onto the top of the cloud forest here, so you can just see the lushness. Now in the background, we're starting to get a little whistle here. There, you hear that kind of deep note. That's the Highlands tinamou. So it may look like a chicken, but it's not a chicken. It's actually a ratite, more closely related to ostriches and emus and cassowaries. And you hear that kind of off into the background. Just incredible. So, you know, I've kind of teased you with lots of sounds and some pretty pictures here. But one overall question that I want us to think about tonight is, why do we have the bird community that we have in every given location, whether it's here in the cloud forest of Panama or here in Western Washington? What are some of the things that drive that? But first, I need to get you down into Panama and the cloud forest so that we can see what we're looking at in Western Panama. So here's the Isthmus of Panama. And so you've got, whoa, my cursor doesn't even come up. Okay, I can't point out the cursor. So right in the middle there where you see that little lake there, that's where the Panama Canal goes through. If you go to the left, in the mountains on the left, you're going to see the mountains are coming down from the Rocky Mountains, and they come in through Costa Rica and then on into Panama. And then off on the right, you're starting to see a few mountains, and they start to head down into Colombia and go on down into South America and the Andes. And what we're going to do is we're going to head here into the very western part of Panama, and we're going to go to Mount Tutumas, which is right on the very west, almost right on the border with Costa Rica. Just to the right of it is Mount Barrow, which is the highest peak in Panama, and it's an active volcano. Now, the Isthmus of Panama started to form about 15 million years ago. It actually only formed a land bridge between South America and North America about 2.5 million years ago. Put that piece of information in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that on and off throughout this evening. Now, I really like this shade relief map because it helps you give a sense of elevation. And where it's white or gray is above 6,000 feet, above 6,500 feet. And so that white area here in the west is on the left-hand side, just before that red line, is where Mount Tutumas is, right along the red line. And then Mount Barrow, that volcano, is just to the right of that. We're going to head right to where that white is here. And now we're there. We're at Mount Tutumas. This is the lodge at Mount Tutumas. And, you know, the next morning you get up and you go up to the lodge, you get a cup of coffee, shade-grown coffee for sure. And you walk out on the deck thinking about breakfast, but you can't. Those scenery and the birds are just amazing. Here's a female flame-colored tanager coming in to eat some fruit. Now, these will eat the fruit, but they don't digest the seeds, so they disperse the seeds when they pass it through their digestive system. And that's really important. Here's the male flame-colored tanager. These are close relatives to our Western tanager. Here's a clay-colored thrush. Look how it looks, almost exact same body shape to our American robin, a close relative of that. Here's the rufous-collared sparrow, close relative to our white-crowned sparrows and golden-crowned sparrows. Now here's a common chloraspingus, used to be known as a bush tanager. It's a small group of birds. They're pretty small and they travel in flocks and make a high-pitched whistling sound. And a tamarack hummingbird. This is a close relative to the riverleaf hummingbird, which you might have seen in southern Arizona. Snowy-bellied hummingbird, a little tiny guy. Oh, and then this silver-throated tanager. This is a gorgeous little tanager, trying to build a nest in amongst that bromeliads there on the left. And notice how, you know, it can't get that in there, so it's going to try this ramming approach, but that didn't work. Couldn't get it in there, gave up. And then you look up and there's a swallowtail kite. A swallowtail kite, you can't believe it. It's just soaring right up this valley. These guys are actually headed north. They may end up going across from the Yucatan over into Florida and nested in Florida. They spend the winter in South America. Here's thick-billed euphonias. Back in the 70s, they used to think those were tanagers, and now they're actually more closely related to the northern finches. And then this is one of the elenias, the flycatcher, tropical kingbird. Tropical kingbird, just lots of unique birds down there. The elenias are like our epitomax. There's a lot of ones that look exactly alike. The tropical kingbird. Now these guys, this is the slaty flower piercer. They're actually pollen pirates. They don't go in through the front of the flower, but poke a hole in through the side, suck out the nectar. So they actually don't function in pollination, which is another important ecological process. This guy does have a tail. He'll come back in a second. There's his tail. So this is the male of that flower piercer. Here's a female thick-billed euphonia. There's the male. Just cute little tiny birds like siskin size. Now this is a boat-billed flycatcher, one of the really big flycatchers. And then the blue-gray tanager. I just think they're really gorgeous. So I've shown you a lot of birds here, and what have we looked at? We've looked at a lot of birds that are perching birds in that family of perching birds. And the perching birds have three major groups. One is the New Zealand wrens, and they're only over on New Zealand. There's only a couple species. Then the biggest group are the songbirds, and the songbirds are here on the left. And we've seen examples of the tanager and the thrushes. And up here, we've got chickadees and we've got jays and crows. Those are all in that songbird group, which has about 5,000 species. And then the other major group of perching birds is known as the subausines. And unfortunately, there's no better name for that. They're just called the subausines. That includes the flycatchers and all our flycatchers that we have up here, but it also includes a whole bunch of birds in Latin America. The cotingas that's been calling in the background, the three-wattled bellbird, and then ant shrikes and a whole bunch of other things like that. So that's the kind of the two major groups. And I want to pause at this point and go back and kind of put some things in context. And let's go back to two time periods. One time period, 100 million years ago. This is where the continents were 100 million years ago. The dinosaurs ruled the world in a lot of respects. Turns out birds were abundant at that time. Birds had evolved and there were lots of kinds of birds at that point. And a couple things that are key here in this is notice the continents are pretty well together in two big units, that northern set of continents and then the bottom southern set of continents known as Gondwanaland. And look at Antarctica. Antarctica is not frozen. And at that point, you know, there that 90 to 100 million years ago, the South America was still connected to Antarctica. Australia was connected to Antarctica, and you could walk from South America to Australia at that point without any trouble at all, except you had to walk a long distance. And at that point, we had birds, we had dinosaurs. Then you come to 64 million years ago, and a giant meteor crashed into where the Gulf of Mexico is now. And as we know, killed off lots of stuff, all the dinosaurs. It actually killed off almost all the birds too. Turns out there were lots and lots of birds out there at this point too. But it looks like now we think that it looks like three separate groups of birds actually made it through this. One of those groups were what became the ratites. So the ostriches, emus, tinamous, kiwis, those are all that rat-type groups. And yes, some of them could fly at this time because they flew to get to New Zealand. So that was one group. And then the second group that made it through that extinction period was a group that eventually split and became all the ducks and geese and swans. And then the other split became all of the gallinaceous birds, the turkeys, the chickens, the quail, the grouse, all of that kinds of group birds. And then the third group became everything else, evolved into everything else. And so that kind of took place just after this, this extinction period. Now, you know, one of the things that the other time period I wanted to touch on is actually the mid-1970s. And that was when I was in graduate school. And, you know, we talk about science and think about science, and science is this constant thing of asking questions, collect data, evaluate that question, see whether your hypothesis was correct, modify that hypothesis, go on and do more. And in the mid-1970s, somebody came out and proposed, they looked at skeletal structures of dinosaurs and skeletal structures of birds. And this guy came out and proposed, you know, maybe birds evolved from dinosaurs. Oh my word, was that controversial in the mid-70s. There formed these big factions within the scientific community that stood on one side or the other side of that fence, and they were arguing back and forth between that. I was a graduate student at the time, and my friends and I, you know, had to go through these exams for our work, and so we didn't really know what our major professors thought. So we had to learn both sides of those arguments inside and out in case one of them asked us a question and he actually was on the other side of that set of arguments. We knew how to kind of deal with that. It's now accepted. You know, we have so much information now that we're not even questioning that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And matter of fact, Jurassic Park's got to be redone because those velociraptors in Jurassic Park should have been covered with feathers. Even that Tyrannosaurus Rex should have had pin feathers all over its body. So they got to go back and redo that. So when we're done with this, call Steven Spielberg and tell him he needs to redo that. So this constant learning process and asking questions. And And even on the question of who made it through this extinction period, there's still lots of controversy around that. But let's keep going on this time period. So now we're getting into that just after and we're starting to get birds are starting to evolve rapidly in different places. It's at this point, that 10 million years after the Cretaceous extinctions, that the perching birds evolved. And we first got one bunch got isolated over in, on the very right, you're seeing New Zealand come off and go off to the right. So we're getting that up there. But then we had the suboceans form, that first kind of primitive group of perching birds. And they were probably all across this open area, from Australia all the way down across Antarctica up into South America. There are currently some in Africa, currently some in Asia, so spread all the way across there. And then along comes the Eocene about 40 million years ago. Two things happen in this Eocene that's really important. Number one, South America and Antarctica separated. You can see that little line, the blue line between South America and Antarctica. Same thing happened between Australia and Antarctica. You got a slight separation there, and that's what formed the southern oceans. Think of them as, the roaring 60s that run through there, Drake's Passage with the nasty waves and all of that, massive wind that are whipping through there. You got that separation, and all of a sudden Antarctica froze up because the water went all the way around there and created kind of a buffer system that then allowed Antarctica to freeze. So we froze up Antarctica. If there was anything in Antarctica, birds-wise, it's gone. And what we were left with was a group of suboceans in South America. And over in Australia, we had some suboceans, but we had the evolution of the songbird group and the development of the songbirds. So we've got isolated in South America. South America is not attached to North America. We've got just these suboceans, and they're allowed to radiate into lots of species there. Meanwhile, over in Australia, the songbirds are starting to take off. And we continue to get that separation over that next 20 million years. We've got this tremendous radiation of birds and evolution of birds just all over the place. And you look at it on this picture, you can see Australia there, and then the arrows running all out. That's to symbolize how the songbird groups have spread all over the world. And then we had new ones evolve. So like here in North America, we've got the wood warblers, we've got the New World sparrows, we've got a bunch of groups here that are unique to the New World. And then we've got groups that are unique to the Old World. And then we've got some that have spread all over the world. And one of those groups is the jays and the crows. Crows, even the genus Corvus, probably evolved someplace in Asia, Europe, but it's now spread back to Australia, spread all the way around the world. So some of these things are highly successful and moving all over the place. So let's then stop here, this period, this kind of mid-Miocene, about 14 million years ago. South America is still isolated, not connected to North America. So it's got all of these suboceans developing different families of birds, all kinds of birds down there. Then we've got the songbirds that have spread all around the world and spreading back around, and they have jumped down into South America, but we've got them spread all the way around. Antarctica's frozen up solid. So I've been talking about these perching birds in that group, and I was just trying to help you understand that a little bit. So you can think back kind of right after the Cretaceous extinction, we get the perching birds evolved. And then soon after they evolved, some of them get isolated in New Zealand as it's just away from Australia, and they became the New Zealand wrens. And there's only, I think, either 2 or 3 living species right now. Then we've got the suboceans evolve, and they're spread across all of these southern continents. And then along comes the Eocene, and we get Antarctica separated and frozen up. So we've got the suboceans isolated in South America, where they evolve into lots of species. Few of them remain in Australia and in Africa. And then we've got the songbirds, which suddenly become highly successful. They've got something new to them that make them really successful, and they spread everywhere and adapt into all kinds of cool stuff. So that's taking place. And this just helps illustrate that. There's what they call the Southern Hemisphere groups of birds. And if you look at from the top down, you go through a whole set of birds. First are those songbirds. then are the subaustines. Then actually we get into all of the all of the parrots, and then into the falcons and their relatives. And so actually songbirds are more closely related to falcons than falcons are to a hawk or an eagle. Or what I should say is a falcon is more closely related to a chickadee than a falcon is to a hawk or an eagle. So just the interesting kind of things there. So I've been talking about these subaustines a whole lot. And that in the middle of the picture is a bunch of the flycatchers. We get flycatchers up in Washington, but then you can see all of these tremendously other groups. There's the ant pittas, the ant shrikes. There's some ones called hummingbirds that not aren't like the wood warbler, just a really fun, diverse group. All right, but let's get back to Panama. So we're up there at 6,500 feet. We're at 8 degrees north latitudes. Daylight varies very little. Temperature, well, on a hot day, temperature is up into the low 70s. On a cold night, it's down to 65. The only thing that varies is rain. And they have a rainy season and a dry season. And April is the transition from the dry season into the rainy season. If the Pacific winds, and that's what we're seeing right now, we get fog coming up the valley from the Pacific. We may get rain, and we may get a shower for 5 minutes. We may get 2 hours of rain in April, but we may get rain. But if the Caribbean winds, we see the clouds coming over the continental divide up there, but then they just kind of disappear on our side as they start coming down on here. Then you're going to have a dry, sunny day. So if you think about that, this is a line drawn from the Pacific Ocean up through Mount Tatumas, up to the top of Mount Tatumas itself, the mountain, and down the other side, up to the continental divide. And what you can see is if the winds are coming in from the Caribbean, they're going to drop all their rain as they come up over the top. And we're just on the left side of that top at about 6,500 feet. But if the winds come in from the Pacific, they're going to bring that wet Pacific air up, and you're going to get a lot of rain. So we're in that transition period, and we're going to move in May. And May through November is the rainy season, and then November through March is the dry season, and April is the transition. And with rain comes flowers, and with flowers come fruit. Now, this is a kind of avocado, and there's actually about 60 species of trees that are related to avocados down there. And as you know, an avocado is a fantastic fruit. It's high in lipids, it's high in protein, it's really nutritious. And the birds love it, as do the monkeys and lots of other stuff. And two of the species I wanted to see are what's known as altitudinal migrants. One is the resplendent quetzal, just a spectacular bird. Nests in holes, doesn't make its own cavity. It uses a cavity made by a woodpecker or somebody else. You can see the tail of one sticking out of here. They come up over the mountains at about the beginning of April and come down to wait for the rainy season. They pair up. That was one singing in the background just a minute ago. And then once they pair up, then they may go quiet for a while and wait for the rains to really go, or they may nest right away then in April. And we saw that one nesting there. But just spectacular, very revered by the Aztecs and the Maya. And the other one is this guy, the three-wattled bellbird, Cotinga, one of those subaustines. And this guy comes across again from the Caribbean side to start the breeding season in May. They are what's known as a dispersed lek. So the males will set up a singing post, but in this case, it's dispersed. There's a male maybe every quarter mile, and they seem to like this 6,500-foot elevation band. And so you have them spread around. And, a lek is like what sage grouse come to, where the males all come in and display in a small area, and the females come and check them out. And if they don't like any of the males there, they go someplace else. Well, here, these males are just spread more out, but they have that absolutely obnoxious call there, right there, that they make in order to hopefully attract in their females and tell the other males that they're where. And this male really liked these perches right here. So we saw him there a lot of times. Look at how big that mouth opens. Google any of these bellbirds and you'll see them just open that mouth. Now, can you name some altitudinal migrants up here? We've got our dark-eyed juncos, our ruby-crowned kinglets, our varied thrush, and our hermit thrushes. All of these move up into higher elevations to breed in the summer, and then down into lower elevations. Yeah, I know dark-eyed juncos are everywhere all year round in Washington, but they do that altitudinal migration also. So we do have some altitudinal migrants here. I want to kind of switch over and talk a little bit about the genus Turdus, which is what the American robins are in. And there's more than 80 species worldwide. And American robins aren't in Panama. And if you're quick to notice, you'll realize that some of the flowers in the background are from Maryland. This was actually when I lived there. But still, we have American robins in the Pacific Northwest. But this genus is fascinating. Now, do you recognize that silhouette? Here it's changing. Looked just like an American robin, didn't it? But it's actually a clay-colored thrush. That body shape, that model, whatever you want to call a group of birds that are closely related, this particular model is really successful. It's spread all over the world and adapted to individual places and become, really successful. We have one species in North America, but you go down to where we are in Panama, and there's actually several there. But the genus seems to have evolved in Central Asia sometime 10 million years ago or so. And then from there, it's spread all over the world. It got to Western Hemisphere somewhere between 4 and 12 million years. And there are two hypotheses. One group of people think it's got up into North America in the United States area. Another group, and that seems to be where most of the evidence is supporting now, I think the first arrival was down in someplace in the Lesser Antilles, maybe got blown across with a hurricane winds, who knows. And it succeeded there, and then it spread out. We now have 40 species in this genus, and they all look remarkably alike. Body shape, they not be color pattern. So on the left, we've got an American robin, but then these other are the 4 species that are there at Mount Tatumas. And the one that's singing in the background right now is the white-throated thrush. But we also have the clay-colored thrush. We also have the mountain thrush. And then the high elevation one is the sooty thrush. And then you can see their distributions from maps from Cornell Lab there. So this family, the thrush family, overall has 170 species about, and it's found all over the world, really highly successful. Think bluebirds, think pouncing solitaires, think all the thrushes, the robins, just a really nice diverse group. But I want to spend time on one genus, Catharsis. And Catharsis is Greek for pure and clean. It's a Western Hemisphere genus. There's 12 living species. Looks like it evolved in Central America. And one of them is one you probably know really well, the Swainson's thrush. And here's the distribution of Swainson's thrushes. And what's kind of fascinating is, the red areas where they breed here in Western Washington. And then you go down and look at the blue area, and there's 2 chunks of blue. There's the heavy blue that runs all the way down the Andes Mountains, and then there's kind of a light blue in Central America. There's 2 subspecies of Swainson's thrush. Rusted back Swainson's thrush is what we have in breeding in Washington. They winter in Central America. And then the olive back is what breeds all the way across Canada and down about halfway through British Columbia. And those guys go down through eastern United States and down into the Andes Mountains. So it's pretty amazing. The Swainson's thrush singing in the background. And look at their migration. Here's their migration. Just watch that. That's spreading up north. Isn't that incredible? Now here they go back south again. So now they're headed back south. They're going to spend the winter down there. Here we go. Now we're on January, March, April. They're headed back north. They're going through Panama in huge numbers. We're up here. Another couple of months, they're going to be here in Washington singing like crazy. Just look at them going back and forth. Isn't that just incredible to watch? Here they go again. Back up again. So that's the pulse. And I thank everybody that submits data to eBird that they do that, because that's why we can do that. Now let's look at an animation like that. Now let's think about that. So most Swainson's thrushes winter in South America, rusted back in Central America. Swainson's thrush raised 1 ounce. Wingspan is 12 inches. Now let's do a little think process. Let's take one that maybe winters on the border between Colombia and Ecuador. So it's going to go up into Canada to breed. Then you got another one that's wintering, say, in Nicaragua, Costa Rica. It's going to come up here to Washington to breed. They got to build up enough fat. Then they get up at night and they fly all night until they run out of energy. Then they got to come down, feed for 2 or 3 days, get up and fly again. And they might fly 250 miles in a night. They might fly 200 miles in a night. They got a good tailwind. Maybe they'll get 400 miles in a night. It may take them 20 nights of flying, not 20 days, 20 nights of flying with a couple days in between each to fatten back up in order to make that flight. And they weigh 1 ounce, and they do that on a 12-inch wingspan. Now, how much is an ounce? I like to eat a lot of wild rice. So I asked that question, how much is an ounce of wild rice? It's 2 tablespoons of wild rice, about a quarter of a serving, maybe a third of a serving. The next time you have some wild rice, look at that pile of rice before you cook at it and think, how many Swainson's thrushes does that represent? 48 garbanzo beans, organic garbanzo beans, dried, not wet or cooked yet. Little, like, they do this on a 12-inch wingspan. Let's see them fly that again. Here they go north. I couldn't do that. I couldn't even imagine doing that. Don't have the physical capability, let being able to orient myself to find that way. But here they go. They're going to go back north one more time. Look at them go, just up through the United States into Canada. Now they're going to head back down to spend the winter. Oh, it's just so wonderful to watch that. So there are other members in this genus that you may know of from North America. This is the other big group in that genus that breeds up here, the various great-tooth flush, hermit thrush, and pigtail thrushes, and their distributions. And here's the similar kind of map for the hermit thrush, just to see you, and for the veery on the right. Veeries spend the winter down in South America, but we do get a few in Eastern Washington. Okay, but let's get us back down into Panama. So we got Swainson's thrushes in Panama. The other 3 members of this genus are the ruddy-capped nightingale thrush. That's what's now singing in the background. We've got the orange-billed nightingale thrush, and then we've got the black-billed nightingale thrush, which is the high elevation one. And we want to go looking for these guys. So Swainson's thrushes are everywhere at this time of year. You can see that blue line that runs from down in the valley all the way up to the top of Mount Catumas, which we're going to go to in a while. And you can see these species divided up by elevation. The orange bill is at the lower elevation, the ruddy cap is in the mid elevation, and the black bill is up high. And we've got a ruddy cap nightingale thrush singing in the background. Isn't that beautiful? I love that word, nightingale thrush. I wish it was Swainson's nightingale thrush. I just love that. I think it's appropriate for how magnificent singers they are. So we're going to head up into the forest there to look for the black-billed nightingale thrush. Another day we'll go down into the lowlands to look for the orange-billed. So let's head up there. Now, if you ever get a chance to travel, one of the things for me that has just been an absolute joy is when I've had a chance to hire a local guide. This is Ronaldo. Ronaldo was 19 when I took this picture, and he is an incredible birder. He could spot things through layers and layers of vegetation, and then had the patience to find them and point them out to me. He was just incredible. When he was 16 years old, he approached the guy that runs the lodge there, Jeffrey, and says, I want to take people birding and be a birding guide. Jeffrey goes, but all you can speak is Spanish and the native language from up there. And he said, I don't care, I'll learn English. And he did. He got his customers to teach him English. And the guy's English is really good now at 19. He's old now. He's probably 23, I think. But, it's just incredible to travel with a local person and get to see the love of this landscape through their eyes is a joy that I really enjoy. So where we're headed? We're headed up into La Amistad International Park, which is the international park that overlaps between Panama and Costa Rica, and we're going to follow that green and that red line that runs up to the right there. You can see where we'll have our lunch here a little bit later on. So we're headed into La Amistad International Park. We get a little ways up there, and Ronaldo stops, and he walks over to this camera, the wildlife camera, pulls out the card, sticks it in his camera, and up jumps a cow coming down the trail, and the next picture is this puma walking by, and he goes, "Oh, puma, jaguar likes the other side of the mountain better." And he puts the stuff back into the car and turns around and walks away. He just was nonchalant about it. It was like, yeah, yeah, so what? This puma had walked there 2 hours before we walked by that place. Fortunately, it was going the direction we were just coming from. So I'm starting to follow Ronaldo up the trail, and he's starting to point out tracks of this puma and where it had scraped when it had urinated to mark the line there. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm nowhere near as fast as Ronaldo. If this puma comes back, I'm lunch meat there. But we also saw monkeys. These are howler monkeys. That was what was calling in the background there. But we're also looking for birds. And little opening there, we found more resplendent quetzals. Here's where they nested several years before I was there. This was an old cavity. And of course, the fruit that are so important to this ecosystem down there. We saw a lot of moths. This is a moth, but we also saw some butterflies. The moths are spectacular. A flame-throated warbler, one of the mid-elevation warblers. This is a rufous-browed pepper stripe. Here's a collared redstart. Isn't that a beautiful little warbler? What kind of warbler? Another collared redstart. This is a ruddy tree creeper. This is again in that subaustine group that I was talking about. The wood creepers are in this group. This is one of those wood creepers group that kind of act like our ground creeper. And then flycatchers. This is a tufted flycatcher. Notice its body shape, very similar to many of our flycatchers. This is a different genus that doesn't get in the United States. Just a really pretty bird. These kind of edge habitats are important for those tufted flycatchers. And here's a collared trogon, a relative of the quetzals. Here's Ronaldo at the right old age of 19. First time he took me birding. 2 years later, I was there with a few friends. He's now 21, getting old. I hope to go back in April. I think he'll be 23 this April. But let's get back on the trail. Find some. Oh, you got to watch for the lizards. They're all keeping an eye on you. I hate to cross one of these lizards. They're about 3 inches long. There we've got the Spangled Cheek tanager. And some of the tree ferns are just amazing to see. Common chorus fingus that's whistling in the background right now. Lots of flowers. We saw orchids and flowers, and these guys too. Oh, and there's a car. If you need a new car, I know where this car is, and I think it's still there. You can go pick it up. And lots of mosses, and it's interesting. The mosses and a lot of like this lichen. They look a lot like the ones we have here. This looks like a necra, and then a lung lichen, and then of course they have lots of bromeliads too. So they have things that we don't have, and lots of club mosses. So we had to go down and cross the Rio Colorado River in order to get up into this pasture that was covered with Costa Rican oaks. One of the things about them that was fascinating was the incredible lush community of epiphytes. It had orchids, it had bromeliads, it had mosses, it had lichens all over it. And Ronaldo showed me some of the orchids were these microscopic ones that the flowers, you still had to use a magnifying glass to see the flowers. Golden olive woodpecker is a close relative to our flickers. And you could look down on top of the canopy up there, and it was just fascinating to see how lush the vegetation was, how covered with flowers, with bromeliads, with all kinds of things that were growing in there. But I turned around in a circle, and I suddenly realized we were looking at the edge of a caldera. There was the ring there. You can really see that in this photograph from Google Maps. Notice that circle. So you start up here at the very top where there's some few white clouds, and you go to the right, you notice that very even circle that comes all the way around and comes a good halfway across the bottom there. That's the edge of a caldera. If you go across the white clouds, there's a big bunch of white clouds, maybe a third of the way in from the left. That's the actual other rim of that caldera. It used to come right across about where those two red lines come together to form the one red line that runs all the way down to the bottom, that's probably where the edge of the caldera was. So this volcano blew out as its last great hoorah out the side, kind of like what Mount St. Helens did. So it kind of blew out the side. And this whole time, we've been inside the caldera of a volcano. And we're going to go up this other red line that runs up into those clouds. That's actually going up on top of a cinder cone that rose up in the middle of this after the big explosion, kind of like that island that's in the middle of Crater Lake. You know, that was also a little cone that came up after the major explosion down there. So we've been in this. That's the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. We're standing on some of that activity there. There's that rim of the caldera. That was a wood creeper. Sometimes you got to cross the water real fast in order to not get wet. Well, we didn't get to see the black face solitaire that we were looking for, but we're headed back down to Mount Tumas. And every time we stop by this little place on the way back to the lodge, there's that three-wattled bellbird up there singing away. Notice how the water is dripping off the tips of these leaves. Again, rainforest, it rains. So we missed seeing it. So we'll go a second time to look for it. This time we're going to go up to the Cerro Tuma, which is Mount Tumas. And that's this cinder cone. And we just go straight up the side of the cinder cone. 2,000 feet in a mile and a half. And I started off real early with Ronaldo, and he whispers to me, "Can I have the flashlight?" I was the only one with a flashlight. Handed it to him, and he signs up there. We saw a common tutu. That was the first tutu ever recorded on the reserve there. This is the lookout from the cloud forest we could climb up. Black face, black-cheeked warbler, high elevation species, more quetzals. We're going up into this Costa Rican oak forest, which is an oak bamboo forest. And the oaks are just loaded with bromeliad. And we had a sunny day, and I'm sitting there I wish it was cloudy, because it was just impossible to get good pictures with that sun and really show what the inside of that forest looked like. Bamboo lives for about 20 years, then it all flowers at once and then dies. And it had flowered the spring before I was there, so it was all dead. It's going to be fascinating to see it if it's come back now 3 or 4 years later there. But understory filled with the tree ferns and just lush bromeliads and orchids and tree and ferns on the trees and mosses. It was incredible. So we'll kind of walk on through there, seeing what we could find. There's collared redstart. Oh, there we go, black-billed nightingale thrush. We found him. There's our black-billed nightingale thrush. Just a gorgeous guy there. There's another picture of him. Here's another chloristingus. This is the city cap chloristingus. Look at how fascinating that understory is. Just loaded. The old bamboo on the bottom there. And there's a large-footed finch. Look at the size of the feet on that finch. Man, that thing could move some dirt. Any towhee or song sparrow or fox sparrow will be jealous of those feet. Really incredible mushrooms in some place. That was bigger than my hat. Quetzals, just gorgeous bird. There's where we're trying to get back to, the lodge. And then we found a northern emerald toucanet. So this is one of the small toucans. It's still bigger than a jay, so it's a pretty good sized bird. And then the three-wattled bellbirds. Look at the size of that mouth. Kind of like a jack-in-the-box. It opens way up. Now here's some spider monkeys. Now watch these things. All the New World monkeys have prehensile tail. If you watch, you'll see some of these ones where they're obviously using the tail to help hang on. And also watch close. One of them, you see a baby hanging off the side. There, the tail goes up to the right there for it to hang. There, it's hanging from the tail there. So these are spider monkeys. There's the tail hanging there. Oh, three-wattled bellbird again, just making sure we get out of his forest. Okay, So now we're going to head down the valley and go look for the orange-billed nightingale thrush. So we're going to take that orangey line down into the lower elevation from the lodge there and head down and see what we can find. We came down through this forest, kind of slipping and sliding along the edge of this series of waterfalls and kind of through a really interesting dense forest here. And when I was there a couple years before that by myself, they found a hermit hummingbird behind. Oh, there we go. There's our orange-billed nightingale thrush. They found a hermit, which is a kind of hummingbird, nesting behind that waterfall. This is the orange-billed nightingale thrush. Again, a beautiful bird. Okay, so we're birding in a shade-grown coffee. If you ever drink coffee, make sure you're buying shade-grown. It's more important to buy shade-grown than it is to buy organic. Shade-grown coffee provides huge amount of habitat for all sorts of birds. Here's a scarlet-ruffed tanager. Here's a coatimundi, relative of a raccoon. Oh, I was trying to get a picture where Ronaldo said something was right above it, and as I snapped, I fell. It was a collared trogon, female collared trogon, relative of a more spider monkeys. And here's a roast-breasted grosbeak, relative of our black-headed grosbeak. This breeds in eastern United States, but winters down there. And these shade-grown coffee plantations are important wintering habitat for it. Fascinating plants. This is a kind of club moss. Oh, there's the best bird of the trip, a chicken. I was so excited to see this chicken. You know, I was raised on a chicken farm. Chickens are an important part of my life. I got down on my knees. I got in real close. I got some really fantastic pictures of it. And, you know, my friends just stood there laughing. Not one of them didn't come down and take a picture of that chicken. I was so disappointed. They laughed for like 20 minutes after that. I can't believe it. Here's the male scarlet-ruffed tanager. Look at that rump on that tanager. Just spectacular. Shows up way far away. Striped-tailed hummingbird, little hummingbird. Here's a yellowish flycatcher. If you look at that and you go, oh, that looks a lot like a Pacific slope or a dusky or a Hammond's, you're right. It's in that same genus. You're right. It's really hard to tell apart. It's the one they happen to have there, so we're pretty certain it's yellowish flycatcher. But again, it's like ours. You need to hear them sing in order to separate them. But it was fun to see that close relative to the ones that we have up here. Here's the spotted crown wood creeper, one of those subausines, as was the flycatcher. These guys kind of fill a niche similar to our nuthatches and our brown creepers. Only this thing's big. You know, it's not as big as a robin, but oh, it's as big as a thrush, I would guess, maybe a little bigger than a thrush. Okay, so you're back up at the cabin, you get yourself a beer, you're sitting down, you're writing some notes, you really saw some cool stuff, and then you get a sense that somebody's trying to talk to you, so you walk out onto the porch, and there you got one of your old friends, the Wilson's warbler there. It's hopping around, it's obviously trying to get you to think about something else. And you know, when I think about this, this is one group of the wood warblers. And for me, the wood warblers would just have a spectacular spot in my heart. When I was a sophomore in high school, I went up to Presque Isle, and I'll show you that in a minute. And we just saw just a ton of them. So the wood warblers is a New World group of birds. It's in this songbird group. So it's in this group that kind of came over, and then they've specialized and evolved. The whole family found just in the New World. 118 species, 18 genera. Here's the ones that we've seen that are local that live there at Mount Tutumas. So the black-cheeked warbler in the upper left, the collared red-starred in the right, and the lower left is the slate-throated red-starred, and the flame-throated warbler on the lower right. So these are all wood warblers. But for me, you know, again, I go back to that sophomore year in high school. In the spring of that sophomore year of high school, 3 buddies and I went up to Presque Isle. I was raised in Western Pennsylvania. We went up to the edge of Lake Erie to Presque Isle, which was this peninsula sticking out into the river there and into the lake there. And the birds would just congregate there before flying across Lake Erie. We saw 24 warblers that day. Many of them headed north to nest in the boreal forest. And so we're coming kind of back to the boreal forest. But I want us to think about the Isthmus of Panama and Washington. So, man, what the hell are you doing, Bancroft? Get us back to someplace in reality here. So let's come back and let's think about the black-throated green warbler complex. So there are 4 species in the black-throated green warbler complex, and you may know some of these, you may know them all. The black-throated green is in the upper left. The black-throated gray, which we have in Washington, is the lower left. The Townsend's warbler, upper right, which we have in Washington, and the hermit warbler, lower right, which if you go a little bit south from the Seattle area, you can find it, and then down through Oregon and California. So this complex. And here's their distribution map. So the black-throated green warbler is the one that breeds up in Canada. And then the Townsends and the black-throated and the hermits are our Western counterparts here. But I want to come back to the Isthmus of Panama and these warblers. So just keep that kind of going there. And let's go back and remember, okay, you probably learned, as I did in high school, oh yeah, when the isthmus formed, all of these land animals headed north, these other land animals headed south, and you see that on the left. Everything that's in blue that's down there in South America had its origin in North America and migrated south when the isthmus formed, and everything that's kind of that dark green up in North America migrated north out of that. So, you know, some really spectacular exchanges going on. But what I never heard talked about was the exchange of water before that isthmus formed between the Pacific and the Atlantic, or the Atlantic and the Pacific. And clearly there was exchange going in both ways, both water going back and forth, biological stuff going back and forth. So that would have been a blockade there. And if we think about it, you know, a little bit more, what was really going on there? Well, you know, my understanding, and I've been trying to double check this, but I remember from when I was down there in Panama once being told, when we were being told about the Panama Canal, they said that the water level on the Pacific side was actually a little bit higher than the water level on the Caribbean side, because of the directions of the prevailing winds in the Pacific would push water up against that west coast there. So there was a net flow, evidently, when it was really open, of warm water out of the Pacific into the Atlantic, into the Caribbean. And when that isthmus closed, it really changed the dynamics there. So that isthmus was started to close around 15 million years ago. 6 million years ago, it was getting pretty closed up. 2.5 million goes, it shut all off, and we had no exchange. And what it did is it evidently disrupted the current system. This was pre the Gulf Stream. And as you know, the Gulf Stream comes warm water out of the Gulf, takes it all the way up. Great Britain is warmer than it would be, than it should be at that elevation because of the Gulf Stream. Well, that hadn't formed yet. The closing of the Isthmus of Panama is thought to be one of the major triggers for the last glaciation period. And so from about 2.5 million years ago to 15,000 years ago, we had a number of major glaciations, 4 of which were these huge, at least 4 of which were these huge continental glaciations that came all the way south, came down into Puget Sound. This particular one doesn't show the lobe going all the way down into Puget Sound, but all the way down into Puget Sound. And with that, it's going to compress south. The vegetation, it's going to change the dynamics of weather all over the place and do some tremendous changes. So what was it doing? So one of the things it did is it pushed that boreal forest south. So there was a big chunk of boreal forest in the southeast. There was a big chunk of boreal forest in the northwest. Look at how big Florida's gotten. And if you go down, it's not only there, but it's also in the tropics. So this white line is showing you what the extent of the Amazon forest is right now. The green is showing you where the Amazon forest was at the height of the glaciation. Let me see if I can go backwards. And notice that it was all blotchy and patched up. So you had a lot of isolation even going on in the tropics, even though there wasn't the ice there. And presumably, I don't have a map to show it, you were getting the same thing here in the Central America, where that cloud forest habitat we went up to was pushed down onto lower elevations. The lower elevation forest was probably fragmented because of ridges and so forth. And so you've got a lot of isolation. And it no doubt influenced the evolution of this genus, Catharus, the Swainson's thrushes and these nightingale thrushes, may have played a role in encouraging the ancestor of the Swainson's thrush to start migrating. Evidently was the first member of this group to start migrating. Then the ancestor of those other four, the hermit, the bicknells, the gray cheek, and the veery, all it was a separate migration start out of it. Why did they start migrating? Well, the two big theories are maybe there's more food farther north because the longer day length, because of the flush of insects we get in the spring, that could have been going for food. Second thing, predation is super high in the tropics. So they may have started migrating in order to try to avoid some predation. Plus with that longer day period, they could lay more eggs and maybe raise more young. It's still controversial, but it's those kinds of ideas. But this could be influencing this. But I want to come back to that boreal forest for a minute. This is where it is right now. But during the height of the glaciation, pushed down into a chunk here in eastern North America, a chunk in northwestern North America, and these guys. So let's go back. The ancestor of this group, so not one of these species, not the black-throated green warbler, but an ancestor of the black-throated green warbler. Think of it as being across that northern forest before that first glaciation. Back in the mid-60s, this guy came out and he hypothesized maybe glaciation played a role in isolating populations and spurring evolution. And so his thought, looking at this group, was that glaciation came down, split the ancestor of the black-throated green, and then one evolved in that west pocket, a different one evolved into the eastern pocket. The eastern pocket one continued and spread back north and spread across and continued on that ancestor of the black-throated green. We're out there in the west, maybe we got the black-throated gray. It looks like it's the oldest of this complex in terms of splitting off. Then we have that interglacial period, they spread back out. Then it comes back down again and it splits that ancestor of the black-throated green a second time. And this time, maybe we get the Townsends, maybe we get the hermit, maybe we get the ancestor of one of those two. And then we get the retreat of the glaciers again, and we get the black-throated green ancestor spreading across again, across there. Then we've got another glaciation. Does that split one that was in the west and then becomes the hermit and the Townsends because they're fairly closely related? Or was that one of them split back off from the black-throated green a second? Who knows? But the main take-home message is evolution's happening. This glaciation is probably playing a role in isolating things, even where there wasn't ice, like down in Central America. This was a cool theory in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But then along comes our ability to look at genetics. And this person in around 2000 took mitochondrial DNA, and there's a whole bunch of birds that fit into this category. Okay, we've got, you could probably name some of them off faster than I can here right now, but we've got things like the spotted towhee in the west and the eastern towhee in the east. We've got the flickers that didn't go all the way into species. We've got, other groups like that, Bullock's oriole and Baltimore oriole. So there were a bunch of groups that they say, oh, maybe they evolved all of these, about 30 of them. So this guy looked at all of these, ran this mitochondrial DNA, which they assume that the mitochondrial DNA mutates at the same rate. And they said, oh, some of these date back before 2.5 million years ago, so the ice age couldn't have done it for them. So they threw the hypothesis out entirely. And if you Google that hypothesis, you'll find some articles in the popular newspapers that basically say, people used to think that the glaciation played a role in the evolution of species, but it's now not true. Well, then 2 years later, somebody else came along and said, wait a minute, the original hypothesis was around boreal species, just to look at boreal species. So they looked at this black-throated green complex. And yes, it has evolved more recently than 2.5 million years ago. So his group concluded, yeah, it may still be true. Now, just to make it even more complicated, they're starting to think that mitochondria DNA does not have a constant rate of mutation. That might go faster in some groups and slower in other groups. So we got a lot more to learn. But the take-home message is evolution is happening. Glaciation probably has played a role for some of these things. How and what else played a role, we don't know, but it's still fascinating and fun to think about, and fun to think about how that Isthmus of Panama has played a role in what we have in the Pacific Northwest. So where have we been today? We've covered a lot of topics, but we haven't had a chance to talk about a lot of really fascinating things. Hummingbirds and pollination, that word tanager. When I first went to southern Mexico in 1972, all tanagers were in one family. Now they're in 4 different families, and some of the things used to be thought to be tanagers are now thought to be more closely related to siskins and house finches and those kinds of birds. We haven't talked a lot about Gondwanaland, a little bit in Australia and the evolution of passerine birds, and then this group parrots, falcons, and passerines. Just a lot of stuff to talk about, but we've had a fun time. And one of the things I find really fun is I really enjoy traveling. I spend a lot of time studying up before I go and think I know a fair amount, but I'm humbled by this bird. I didn't even know this bird existed until the night before we hiked up on top of Mount Tutumas. And Jeffrey, the owner down there, said, "Oh, maybe we'll find a large-footed finch." And I go, "What?" Well, anyways, this finch, look at the size of those feet. This finch is just remarkable. And it's just really wonderful to get out and see the birds, hear the birds, think about birds, especially now when we can't necessarily travel as much because of COVID or enjoy it with other people. I hope this has been fun. I wanted to thank all of you, and I wanted to thank Jeffrey and Alma Dietrich, who have the place there, and Ronaldo, the guide that took me out and joined me on this journey of love. It's a wonderful chance to be out in the wild and see things. And if you've got iTunes or Spotify or Amazon, you can listen to a lot of the sound recordings I've made. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thomas?
Yeah.
Vic here. Yeah, that was a fabulous presentation, and thank you very much for sharing with us as you have. Really appreciate the in-depth of knowledge as well as the humor that you bring with it. That was
okay. Thank you.
Great
yeah.
fun. Yeah. Question: as you were wandering through the backcountry of Panama and the mountains and jungle, what do you have for snakes there?
Oh, snakes. Yeah. So there are 2 snakes I think that I worried about there. There's what the heck is it called?
How about the fairy lance?
Yeah, the fairy lance. I
Yeah.
was always worried about that, but we never saw that, and I didn't got any impression that it was particularly common. The one that was more to worry about was the green vine snake, because it could be up at arm level, in a bush, just sitting there, and it will look just like the bush. And so, we would joke about it, basically, is all. Again, I never saw one. But that, that was the other one, we would wonder about and stuff. But the trails, the trails that we were traveling on were open trails. And, I think it was, we didn't have a lot to worry about. Yeah. So, yeah. Good. And you didn't need to worry about mosquitoes there either. No mosquitoes, but don't sit on the ground. I forgot one time and sat on the ground. There's lots of chiggers down there. So, so you get chiggers, but the mosquitoes aren't too bad. One year, the other years I didn't get any chiggers, but one year I sat on the ground when I was too tired to walk anymore. And I was like, and Ronaldo goes, "Why are you sitting on the ground?" And I said, "I'm tired." And what he should have said was, "Go over and sit on that stump." Because if I'd sat on a stump, I wouldn't have gotten chiggers, so.
Well, thanks, Thomas. And once again, if anyone has questions, you could put them in the chat or turn your camera on and ask Thomas directly. It looks like Bonnie's saying, "What an amazing and delightful presentation. Loved it." So a lot of good accolades. Jim, maybe you have a question?
Yeah, when I was down in Panama in my youth, there were quite a few ups and downs. I mean, it was like all these chasms and peaks heading north of the canal zone.
Yeah.
This alone must create diversity down there because of these different, as you explained to it, low and it just must be a mix of birds.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And as you saw in that one elevation graph, just going at where the lodge was, which is 6,500 feet, you had one set of birds there. If you went a mile and a half down, which was a mile and a half down on the road, which was, 500 feet down in elevation, you got some other birds down there. And if you went up 1,000 feet, you got some other birds up there. So up on top of Mount Tutumas, up on top of that cinder cone, we could have gotten 10 species of birds that we didn't have at the lodge, 2,000 feet below it. And I got to see 5 of them. There's still 5. I have not seen the sooty thrush. And then there's several other ones that are up there that I didn't get to see. But you're right. I mean, it's just like, we're going to go over here. And, the first time I went to the lodge, I had all this list of birds I might see. And I'd say, well, is it like one was the Vulcan hummingbird? And I said, is it the Vulcan hummingbird? I said, no, we're not high enough for that. It's just like good stuff. So, yeah. It was really fun. The other thing about that kind of elevation you were talking about, so I flew into David and then arranged for a shuttle to take me from David up to the mountains there, up to the lodge. It was an hour to the beginning of the driveway. The driveway is 10 kilometers long. It took an hour to get up that 10 kilometers because the road was so rough,
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, beautiful country.
Well, Thomas, there's a question in the chat from UJ about what do the three-wattled bellbirds eat? Sorry, the three-wattled bellbirds eat.
Yeah. They're big fruit eaters. So, again, they're moving with the fruit and coming over to feed on fruit. So they're in that Cotinga family, which has, a whole bunch of birds in there that are all, again, the Latin American species in that subausines. And many of them are fruit eaters. I'm sure they take some insects too, but they're following that avocado fruits, those relatives of the avocados, Lauriaceae.
Just out of curiosity, I noticed when I'm off the coast here of Washington fishing or something, just an enormous number of species of birds out there. I call them sea feeders. Do those folks do they migrate like regular birds? Let me get my
so things like the shearwaters off there, off the coast of Washington, you're talking about like shearwaters?
Yeah, shearwaters, and God, I saw the puffins, not so much.
Some of the shearwaters are really fascinating. Some of them, short-tailed shearwaters nest in Australia, and what's the other big shearwater that's out there? It nests in New Zealand, and they do these major figure eights where they nest down there in our winter, and then they kind of do this major figure eight migration up through the Pacific, up to the Gulf of Alaska, and then back down. So yeah, some of them do these incredible 20,000 mile migrations annually.
What were the shearwaters that we saw so many of on that trip to Alaska?
Oh, sooty shearwaters might be, yeah. So sooty shearwaters do that big migration too. Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of these upwellings that occur. They only occur seasonally in most places. I know they have these anchovies down in Peru,
right?
And then they have upwellings up in the North Atlantic, North Pacific.
Yep.
And this affects the seasonality of the fish that are caught. So I would assume it affects the seasonality of the birds that feed on everything.
It does. It does for sure. Yeah, it does for sure. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and probably if you Google it, they're starting to get some really fascinating stuff with these satellite transmitters where they can follow these birds and see where they go. And they're just incredibly movements of some of these pelagic birds around. Yeah, really neat.
So Thomas, besides all the great photographs that you're taking, it sounds like you're doing recordings as well. And
yeah,
so how'd you go about taking those? Do you have your own recording equipment?
Yeah, so I started off using my iPhone initially, and then I got a little dedicated recorder and added a few microphones, and then right now I have kind of 4 or 5 setups. I've got a bigger recorder that I use with a parabolic reflector, but then I have a bunch of what I call drop rigs. So I have some little Sony recorders that I will then put back into a dry bag, and then I run out and I put a pair of microphones on either side of like a tree trunk so I can get some stereo for it. And I'm just setting that up. I'd like to go back to Panama in April, and I want to like hike one day up to the top of Mount Tutumas, leave one of these rigs up there, come back in 3 days and pick it up. And of course, then you got to go through 3 days of recording, which won't be mostly garbage, but who knows what you might get, so I've got a bunch of those to kind of play with. So I have that. And yeah, I don't know if you can see it, like here's one that I just bought. That's a little tiny microphone that I'm going to use with like a GoPro or use with my camera just to improve a little bit of quality, because I've got this project I want to do. I'm in around blue jays and them coming in to feed, and I want to be able to get some good sounds with them. So yeah, it's just fun, All right. Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed that brief trip to the greater South there, and hope you're all doing well and enjoy birds.
Do you have a website, Thomas, before you leave?
Sure. It's thomasbancroft.org.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll have the video posted on our website, and we usually
Okay.
put a link to the presenter's website as well. So let's all give a big round of applause for Thomas. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank
That
you,
was great.
everyone, for joining us.
That was really great.
You're welcome. Have fun. Love birds and enjoy them. So yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. This concludes the program.
Okay. Night.
Good night.
Right.